How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another video. Today I'll show you how to make Pandoro, which is an Italian Christmas bread. It's flavored with citrus, loaded with butter, and slow fermented for extra flavor and keeping quality. And this particular recipe uses a no-knead dough, so it makes the job super easy. And because the dough will spend most of its time in the fridge, it makes this super low maintenance, and you can fit it around your schedule easily. So I'll just go and call this the easiest and most convenient Pandoro recipe out there. Let's get right to it and see what we need to make this. A bowl for mixing, scales, a dough scraper, temperature probe, which I ended up not using, a fine grater for the zest, a rolling pin, some parchment paper, and some tin foil. The bread may look complicated and intimidating, but there's not much equipment needed to make it, with one exception, the Pandoro mould. You can find this in my Amazon shops, linked down below. Alternatively, make the bread in a tall cake tin. It'll still taste the same. The ingredients will be split up in 3 parts, but here's a look at everything you will need. Some strong white bread flour, an egg yolk, water, sugar, yeast and salt, some butter, lemon zest and orange zest. We'll need vanilla paste, vanilla syrup or vanilla essence, or you can use half a fresh vanilla bean and some icing sugar for dusting. The dough will be laminated with butter, so we'll start the process by creating the butter square to go inside the dough. Take 2 parchment paper squares and fold them up like this. This will be our mold for shaping our butter in. Now unfold it and remove the top piece. Now place the butter onto the square in the middle. Now get the second piece of paper and lay it on top. Now fold it up following the lines we created earlier, flip it over, and then using a rolling pin, press it into shape. As for the size of the butter square, don't worry about it too much. This is not a precision job. It should be about the size of your hand, from your wrist to your fingertips. We're not using any rulers in this recipe, keeping it simple. Flatten the butter nice and evenly, make sure it gets into all the corners. Now this can go in the fridge until we need it. Now let's start making the dough. It begins with a pre-ferment, or a sponge. We're going to take the water, add the yeast, and a portion of the total flour. Then we'll mix this until there's no more dry flour left, we'll cover it up, and we'll leave it to proof. This will help to kickstart the fermentation, because after we add the second set of ingredients, the dough will go in the fridge, and there must be some fermentation before we refrigerate it. So 1 hour later, the pre-ferment's puffed up beautifully. It's nice and airy, it's full of bubbles. And I'm using room temperature ingredients. If your kitchen is particularly cool or warm, it may take you longer, it may take you less time. But once your pre-ferment's puffed up, you can start making the first dough. So add the egg yolk, the sugar and the butter, and mix it well. You want to mix this until the sugar is completely dissolved. Only then add the flour. And after you've added the flour, mix it properly again. Make sure there's no dry flour left, make sure there's no lumps. Proper mixing is an important part of this recipe, because we're not kneading this dough. The only way we can distribute these ingredients evenly is by mixing the dough properly. Now we can start the first cold proof. Pop it in the fridge for 12 to 24 hours. And 12 hours should be the minimum. You can actually go over 24 hours if you want to. I kept it in my fridge for around 18 hours, and it's puffed up beautifully. It's nice and bubbly and light. Now we can make the second dough, or the final dough. We are of course making only one dough. That's the final stage of it. The remaining ingredients are going to be mixed in now. And still, we need to mix it properly and do it in stages. So add the egg, the salt, the orange zest, the lemon zest, the sugar, the vanilla syrup or vanilla paste, but don't add the flour yet. We need to mix this well before we add the flour. Again, our aim here is to completely dissolve the sugar and the salt and to distribute all the ingredients evenly. So when you think you've mixed it properly, mix it some more, and only then add the flour. And that's our last ingredient for the dough. And the dough still hasn't left the bowl. How convenient is that? I'd suggest using your dough scraper at this point. Make sure to mix until there's no dry flour left, and then mix for another minute. I wet my dough scraper with some water after I was finished mixing, and I was scraping the sides of the bowl. If you leave dough on the sides of the bowl, it'll only get crusty. But that's all there is to it. Now the dough has been fully mixed. We can cover it up and leave it to cold proof again. And it's the same as before. It can go in the fridge for 12 to 24 hours, or more, depending on your schedule. Adjust it to your life. Unlike with many other breads, this time you're in charge. I kept this in the fridge for around 24 hours, and it's puffed up beautifully again. But 12 hours is definitely the minimum here. Now we can laminate it with the butter square that we made earlier. The dough is a little bit sticky, because of the fact that it contains a lot of egg and we haven't kneaded it. So give it a generous dusting of flour before taking it out the bowl. Place it on the table with the smooth side pointing down. Then you can dust it a little bit more with flour just to make sure it doesn't stick to your hands. Now we want to flatten it out so it fits the butter square comfortably right in the middle of it. This process will be quite similar to laminating croissant dough, but don't worry, it's not as technical or precise. Simply flatten your dough, and once you're happy with the size, take your butter square and pop it right into the middle of it. I kept it out of the fridge for a few minutes, just to soften it up a little bit. You want to place it on the dough in this orientation, because we're going to take the corners of the dough and make them meet in the middle of the butter. The butter should be just a little bit soft, so it doesn't break up as we roll the dough out. If it's pretty hard still, then you can simply leave it uncovered for a minute and only then fold the dough up. Anyway, once you're ready, take the corners of the dough and make them meet in the middle of the butter. And you can pinch the seams together with your fingertips, so they don't come loose. Now you want to dust the dough with flour on both sides, generously. Now you want to grab your rolling pin and roll this dough out to about twice its length. Don't worry about widening it, just roll it out in one direction. And once you're happy with the length, you can turn it sideways and just finish rolling it out. Try and make it as straight as possible, but of course we're not aiming for absolute precision here. So if it comes out a bit wonky, don't worry about it. Now we can do the first fold. I'm going to take one side of the dough and fold it over into the middle. Brush off any excess flour as you're doing this. Now take the other side and fold it over to meet the first side in the middle. Again, brush off any excess flour. You can pinch the seam together in the middle. Now fold it over once again, following that seam. And that's the first fold done. And it is quite similar to how you make croissant dough. We will need to give this dough a second fold, but before we can do that, we have to chill it down. At the moment it's a bit tight, because we rolled it and folded it. And it's also a bit fragile, so we need to give it about 15 minutes in the fridge to chill down and relax. Make sure you cover it well with some cling film, pop it in the fridge for around 15 minutes, then we can do the second fold. We need to make sure that we roll this dough in the correct direction. So if you look at it, it's got two open ends, one open side and one closed side. You want to roll it in the direction of the two open ends. And just as earlier, use a generous dusting of flour and roll it nice and evenly. This time you want to roll it to about 1.5 times its length. And whenever I want to roll something, I always start by pressing it out by hand. That just gets it in the right shape. Once you've rolled it to the correct length, turn it sideways and roll it a bit more. We want to widen it a little bit. So as I said earlier, we're not looking for precision. You can clearly see the butter is broken up inside the dough. But that's not a big deal. We don't want this dough to be actually layered. It's just a way of incorporating the butter into it. As for the folding, this one is slightly different because we folded it in thirds. So fold a third of the dough and then fold the other side over, creating 3 layers. Now we can wrap it up and leave it in the fridge for another 15 minutes before the final shaping. And whilst that's chilling, we can prepare the Pandoro mould. Take a piece of butter and rub the inside of the mould with it. Make sure you get in all the corners. Take your time, make sure you rub the whole surface properly. Take out any excess butter chunks once you're finished. Now take some flour and sprinkle it in the bottom of the mould. And from here, all you want to do is shake it around. Start from the bottom, then turn the mould on the side and work your way towards the top. If you feel like you need to add more flour, well, add more flour. Because once it's all nicely dusted, we'll shake it out. And don't bash it against your nice wooden table, because it will leave some marks. Sometimes I don't use my head. But this is how your Pandoro mold should look like. Now let's clean down this mess. And let's do the final shaping, which is really simple. All we want to do is shape it into a ball. Now examine your piece of dough and find the best looking side. And lay that side down onto the table. The dough should not be sticky at all at this point, so don't use any flour. You want to flatten it out a little bit. Then take a corner and fold it over the middle and seal it up. And then just keep going around in a circle, folding the dough over the middle and pressing it in. You want to reach the point where you started, and the dough should be nice and round once you're finished. Now flip it smooth side up again, and then using the palms of your hands, just correct it so it's nice and round. And then you can pick it up and pinch the seams together at the bottom. You gotta admit, this is a pretty simple recipe. The hands-on time is minimal. Now you want to place this in the mold in the correct orientation. The smooth side must point down, because that will be the top of the loaf. But before we place it into the mold, we want to shape it so it fits a little bit better. Try to create a pointy end using the palms of your hands. It may sound funny, but you want it to look like a massive hazelnut. See what I mean? This will ensure that it fills the mold properly. And once you have placed it in the mold, press it down. You want to try and make it fit all the gaps before we even start final fermentation. But don't go too crazy. You don't have to be forceful. Just press it nice and evenly and gently. So now you have a choice. You can either leave it at room temperature for the final proof, or you can refrigerate it and proof it later, which is what I did. Again, it can be chilled for 12 to 24 hours, or even up to 48 hours. If you leave it at room temperature after final shaping, it may take 6 to 8 hours to rise. But if you chill it down like I did, it will take longer. In fact, this took around 12 hours to reach the top of the mould. So it'd be best to take it out of the fridge late in the evening or early in the morning. Now 1 hour before baking, preheat the oven 160 degrees Celsius with a fan on, which is 320 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is puffed up beautifully. This is exactly how it should look. Now unwrap it gently, because it might have stuck to the cling film, like mine did. And handle it gently also, you don't want to bash it around. It's so light and airy now, that you don't want to deflate it. Now it can go in the oven just as it is. We'll bake it for 15 minutes. And during this time it should puff up and start browning nicely. But after 15 minutes, you want to take it out. Because the loaf is so tall, the top of it will go too dark by the time it's finished baking. So you want to cover it with some tin foil. It will still keep browning, it will get baked properly, but it won't go too dark. Now we can finish baking it for another 35 minutes. It should be nicely golden brown all over. And this is looking pretty good, I must say. Because the loaf is so light and airy, you don't want to remove it yet. Leave it in the tin to set for around 15 minutes. This will ensure that it keeps its shape. Before you tip it out, give it a quick shake, just to make sure that it's not stuck to the tin. Now carefully tip it out, revealing that beautiful star-shaped design. And this is the orientation it should be in. The bottom is actually the top. Now you want to leave this to cool down completely. Because of the slow fermentation and all the fat that we use in the dough, it should stay soft and fresh for a few days. Of course it will be best on the day of baking. But if you want to keep it for longer, make sure you wrap it up after it's cooled down. Wrap it in some cling film or tin foil. And before serving, dust it well with some icing sugar, all over. You can use as little or as much as you want. As you can see, I did not hold back. But there you have it. That's how you make a no-knead Pandoro. What do you think of this recipe? Have you tried Pandoro before? Let me know down in comments. And if you have any questions or suggestions, also let me know. And check out my Breads of Christmas playlist. You will find many more Christmas bread recipes from all over the world there. And click that subscribe button if you haven't already, because if you love bread and baking, you've come to the right place. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.